Page 27, we continue our discussion about two different components. One is the idea that ad, ve'ad bichlal, and one is the tefillah overt or tefillah not overt. Let me refresh your memory for several of you that just walk in. The concept of ad ve'ad bichlal, meaning if you're including something as part of that. The whole discussion was about missing praying. For example, if it's a Shabbat, someone missed Musaf, and now it's a time for Mincha, etc. So we ask a question if we hold that way, or the other way is that is a concept of tefillah overt, which means you're passing a certain time and it's already past the time. I want to refresh your memory now the previous discussion, and I encourage those of you who are not here in the past shiur to just watch us. Now it's available on YouTube, Baruch Hashem. It was originally a question of who instituted the whole prayer and what's the purpose of saying mainly the prayer of the Amidah, the Shmoneh Esrei. One school of thought said that it was instituted by our patriarch Abraham, Yitzchak and Yaakov. Shachari, the morning prayer by Abraham, we brought the source. Afternoon by Yitzchak, we brought the source. Evening by Yaakov, and we have the source. So that's one school of thought. Another school of thought saying that is a reflection of the Beit HaMikdash, of the temple. Since the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, is no longer in existence, we hope that it will rebuild, but as long as it's in its destruction, we use our lips as a substitute for those offering. So since at the time of Beit HaMikdash it was a time constraint of offering, which is we have a certain time that we can pray more, we can have this offering morning, afternoon, evening, and those time restrained with a certain limitation. Therefore, that's a reflection of prayer. In conclusion, so far we said that it's a combination of two, which is we agree and believe and follow that our ancestors Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov instituted it. By the same token, we put a certain restriction over time. The next question involved is, since we put a restriction of time, we need to know how to handle situation when someone missing. We're not talking about missing day after, we're talking about missing in a sense of time. It's a time already for the following prayer, and then what we do to catch up the previous one. So we continue on 27a. אלא מאי עד ולא עד בכלל, אימה סייפה. ושל מוספים כל היום, רבי יהודה אומר, עד 7 שעות. So, rather, what is the alternative? The until means until, the including, meaning the first clause of the Mishnah is difficult. As explained before with regard to midpoint in the afternoon. What is the halacha difference between Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and opinion of the rabbi? Since we have two different options. What's the real question? It's the question of the proper time. We said if we go by the end Veshal Musafim Kol Hayom, that you go by the Musaf, that the time to say additional prayer on Shabbat and festival is the whole day. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Ad 7 Shaot. Rabbi Yehuda put a time restraining until the 7 hours. Vetanya, and we learned in different Braita that if a person have the choice between saying Mincha or Musaf, so first he needs to have Mincha. You remember, Gilbert, you just said it earlier. Why? Because it's follow the idea of Tadir v'shel no Tadir, something that is frequent and something that is infrequent. We go by the frequent first, which means if you take the whole week, wrap it up with the prayer, sequence of prayer, you see that Mincha is more often. Musaf, it's only once a week. Mincha, it's every day. So therefore, because Musaf you only do it on Shabbat and festival, so we follow the general principle that if something is frequent, it's precedent to something that is infrequent. So Rabbi Yehuda hold because of that is not a sufficient reason. He said that since you miss Musaf, you should go by the Musaf first. Why? Because he said shezo overet vezo ena overet. So in other words, Rabbi Yehuda hold מתפלל מוסף של מוסף אחר כך מנחה, because the time of Musaf past, which means this is a certain restriction of time, especially if you conjunction it with the time of offering. And mincha, you still have enough time to do mincha. Why? Because you have a time until plug, midpoint. If you take that these two prayers are together, so you say that ad, which means until 7 hours, meaning until the beginning of the 7 hours, until the midday. Heiche mashkachat leushte tfilot bahade adade. How you catch two prayer together? Why? Kevan de'atya la shel mincha azra la shel musafi. Because now is the time to say mincha, so, which is half an hour after the chatzot. So the time of musaf, it's already passed. It's too late. And therefore, ela mai ad ve'ad bichlal. So what's the purpose of ad and ad bichlal? So it's still we back to our question: what is the plaga mincha, the midpoint? Kasherei shama'ika ben Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan. So what is the difference in the halacha between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan? I remember in my childhood, just as a side point, I'm digressing sometimes, forgive me. But on Shabbat, my father was a rabbi in a shul, a large shul in a neighborhood called Neve Sha'anan in Haifa, in Israel. And on Shabbos, it was an old controversy that people go during the time of Haftarah, and they go out and they start drinking schnapps and things like that. So it was a guy that became religious. He went with them and he drank, and was probably drank too much. And when he was back sober, it's way after the time of it was already late afternoon time of mincha. So he came to my father, and asked, "No, what should I do now? Should I do musaf or mincha?" So in that case, my dad said to him, "Well, you are not sober at that time, but here." So back to our question, said, "Mi savar dehai plag mincha, plag achrona kama." So do you tell me that plag mincha, which means the midpoint of mincha, it's the last one? Says ve'hachi ke amar. If you tell me that plag eima nafik plag rishona ve'ayel plag achrona, which means until the midpoint is until up to the first half hour until the time of mincha. So when he mentioned earlier, if you remember the 11 hours, so we say that altogether it's 11 hours minus a quarter hours. So you see now that is unity with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, the previous one and this one, which means that he meant to say ad ve'ad bichlal. This included the other one. Amar Rav Nachman Rav Tanina. Now we need to come to the conclusions, because soon we're going to bring the halacha. So the practical conclusion is that according to Rabbi Yehuda, a person can do shacharit until 4 hours of the day, which again, there is a concept lechatchila, what we wish, and there is a concept what happened by circumstances. So up to the 4 hours. But Rav Nachman add to that, and he said, we also learn from different Mishnah. There is a Mishnah in Tractate Deut. Eduyot is like witnesses. That is several witnesses that the sages brought their opinion in regard to rare circumstances, rare halachot. They are not sure how to have the minhag. In this masechet, Eduyot is like idit. Idit, it's when we talk in Bava Metzia in the karkaot, in the property, it means that the top, which means that is really clear. So here Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava brought 5 Eduyot, and he said as follows: Shemema'anim et haktana. Number 1, it's a little girl that unfortunately she turned to be an orphan in a very young age, and before she turned the proper age, the married by her either mother or brother, and now, if she reach a point of the proper age, which is a different opinion what exactly you call upon, but let's just talk simply in our language. Let's call it in a time of fully comprehension of or in the age. So she can be basically follow the idea of mi'un, which means she can turn to a point. She said, I don't want this husband, and she can basically annul whatever someone else make a decision for her earlier. It's very important because you see it in several cases in Judaism. We mentioned the other day, in a case it's a sensitive, but we have to talk about it. If it's a child who adopted by Jewish parents, and the child was raised properly in a Jewish home, still he or she needs to go before the rabbi. Some go before the Bet Din too, at the age of the bat mitzvah, to confirm their Judaism, because we hold, as much as we love to have them part of ours, they are still basically was raised Jewish, not by their choice, but by the circumstance of parents adopting them. So it's a serious point in halakha, because we said many times that in Judaism we don't proselytize, we don't run after people. Quite the contrary, we rejected people, like you read in the book of Ruth, in the Yomei and Ruth. So since someone was raised Jewish and wished to be Jewish, he or she needs to confirm it at the time that they have their ability to confirm. In that sense, we can juxtapose to the point here that when it's a certain age, the girl was without her choice because she was a little baby or whatever, a very little girl without the ability to make her own choices. When she reached the age of adulthood, she can reject the previous notion of marrying her to someone. So that's the rare halakha that they brought from Deut. The second one, by the way, here it's not, I wish that it's so simple. I just gave you the vignette, the key point. For sure, if it turns that act of marriage was correct, meaning it makes in the proper procedure, it's a complicated in a sense of chalitza and yibum to release her halachically correct. But Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, he witnessed shememaanim, that they convinced the little girl, if she was not set up properly, that she can basically rejected this potential husband. So let's say in a hypothetical scenario, they set her up at the age of, let's say, 2.5 years of age with someone. She's not capable of any interaction as a husband and wife, but now let's just trace a scenario that she's now in the age of, let's say, 15 or 12, whatever, the certain age of adulthood. So she turned to that age, and now what happened is she can come back, and she can say, I don't want to marry that man. Since they don't have a marital relations, and the whole act of marriage without her consent, so basically she can reject it, or we convince her to reject that act. Another one, ושמסיעים את האישה על פי יד אחד. Again, this is a rare circumstance. There are a few Gemarahs that are dealing with that. But in general, if a husband is, unfortunately it happens, missing in action, he disappeared. He didn't leave in a chaplain a get, and he is who knows where. Maybe he's dead, maybe he's alive, maybe he's a captive, but it's a long time. And like in Israel, it happened at the early stage of the state, that it was a submarine Dakar that disappeared with many cellular. So in a case of that situation, you have to release those women, agunot, from a state of uncertainty, because they are struggled. They want to have family, they want to have children, they want to have husband, and the husband didn't left any note, they have no clue. And you can provide them with the proper get because he didn't leave a divorce paper to the wives. So basically we are very lenient. And the rabbi said that one of the things is usually the requirement for the court, for the rabbinical court, is to have two proper witnesses, kosher witnesses, that come and testify before the court that they saw a certain person, certain location, etc., etc. For example, we saw a body, and he described the body, and we saw it in the enemy line behind the river, so and so, for example. So if it's two proper witnesses that come before the court can release her and allow her to marry with someone else. But if it's a situation that it's only one person, we said in this circumstance we allow, if someone come and testified that he saw the body and he described it, we accept it. And we don't require two witnesses the same as the other normal regular case. ועל תרנגול שנסקל בירושלים על שהרג את הנפש, and also for a rooster. This is important point that it was a situation like can happen any time, that there are certain animals that can be very dangerous to society, and sometimes they are so wild that unfortunately you have to put them either in treatment or even to sleep in order not to damage the property. So it was it's basically followed the Torah. The Torah said in Exodus 21 that if an ox created the damage, and a constant damage, once, twice, 3 times, it's already considered mu'ad, which means it's too many times. You have the mitzvah of, restraining him, in a sense, that sometimes putting him to sleep. So that was in a sense, rooster that was kill a baby or something like that. But anyway, some certain animals. Not long ago, I heard that it was an incident in the upstate New York with a bear that walking the camp and just took a baby and hugged it to death. So in other words, there are certain animals in certain circumstances that can be very dangerous to people. Anyway, so that's a rare halacha. Another one, ועל יין בן 40 יום שנתנסך על גבי המזבח. So again, that a wine that passed 40 days, it's a certain situation that it's a 40 days is sometimes a challenge, so they is allowed. And another one is ועל תלמיד של שחר שקרב ב4 שעות, that usually we don't take it for so long, but this is an offering, daily offering that was accepted even in the 4 hours. Even the what we learned earlier from Rabbi Dr, that he didn't hold that way. So they said here Shema mina ad ve'ad bichlal Shema mina. So you learn from that because we depend on the other Mishnah in Eduyot, that Rav Kahana hold that this Mishnah in Eduyot is ad ve'ad bichlal, that's included, that learn from this final testimony, which is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Dr, that until means until and including, and the Gemarah concluded Shema mina. Indeed, we learn from this. אמר רב כהנא, הלכה כרבי יהודה, הואיל ותנן בבחירת הכבתי. So based on this Mishnah, Rav Kahana said that the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Dr, since we learn in the Mishnah in the prefer, in the way that we mentioned from the Tractate Eduyot, in accordance to his opinion. So since the halacha is ruled in accordance to the Mishnayot in Eduyot, so the opinion of the Tana, who rules in according to opinion of Rabbi Dr, is that the Mishnah means that the halacha is in according to that opinion. A few halachot. Number one is about mi'um ktana. This is important halacha. Is the Shulchan Aruch Even HaEzer in 172. Said this important point. He says one may persuade the minor girl to refuse. So 2 brothers were married to 2 sisters and were orphaned from their father, and one of the sisters who passed the age of a majority was betrothed to her husband of her own volition, and her marriage was by Torah law. The other sister was a minor, and the brother agreed to her betrothal in in a certain way in the local parentis, which means consequently a marriage was rabbinic law. So if the husband of the older sister died, his brother will be obligated to enter into a Levirate marriage with the other sister. However, he will be forbidden to do so by the prohibition of the marrying two sisters. So in this case, based on the testimony of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, they persuade the younger sister to opt out of a marriage by means of the right of refusal, enabling her husband to enter into a Levirate marriage with our older sister. So that's important. Rambam also said it in the Hilchot Yibum Bechalitza, chapter 7. You should also see the Shulchan Aruch 175. Another important halacha that is said in the Rambam in Sefer Nashim, Hilchot Gerushim, the Rambam said, and I quote him in chapter 12, Shemasiim et ha'isha al pi yed echad. That's important halacha. One may allow a woman to marry based on one witness. If a woman's husband traveled to a distance venue, as we said, or for example is missing in action, etc., and one witness from the venue came and testified that he died, she may remarry based on that testimony. In all cases, the requirement is to have the testimony of two witnesses. However, since the information in this case is likely to be confirmed or contradicted, the assumption is that the woman will not remarry unless she was certain that the testimony was true. The sages were lenient and accepted the testimony in order to save the woman from the never-ending status of deserted wife, and unfortunately there is an organization in New York, and there are other organizations worldwide that are dealing with a situation like that, that can be just personal issue between them, they don't get along, and he's like taking an act of revenge and he disappeared. Can be other options that things like that happen, but it's just awful to their hearts go out for those ladies that they are in a situation of limbo. They don't want to date with another man, they don't want to marry another, as long as they're not released, and in some circumstance they need to go to a certain process. So nowadays more and more Rabbanim, Baruch Hashem, they gather together and try to find a way to release those women. And one of the ideas, it's from this Rambam, that you have one witness is sufficient to release them. I know it's a matter of fact that in the armed forces in different places in the world, the chaplain, we met here not long ago, Rabbi Perez, the chief rabbi of the IDF. He came as a guest speaker here, if you remember. So we, by the way, we discussed many halachot, so we get to that point, and he mentioned that part of what they are doing nowadays, it's when the special forces go to a mission, the chaplain asks the soldiers to leave a get in his drawer, just in case he's a long time missing in action, he can release easily the wife with that get. But again, it's just an example. Another halacha, it's again from the Rambam, Hilchon Nizkei Mamon in his Sefer Nezikim. He said in Yud, in chapter 10, Val Tarnegol Sheniskal. So it's not just about the rooster that was stoned, it's any animal or even a bird that kills a person is basically deserved to be put in death. In those days by stoning, you can put him nowadays in sleep, but again, it's the circumstance. If it's we define it by tam and muad, which means if it happens just once, or it happens like the guy in Australia, or it happens in a sequence order for 3 times, so it's a muad, and it's something that it's dangerous. Anyway, another halacha, that's a yain ben 40 yom shenitnasech al gabei hamizbeach, 40-day-old wine that used for libation on the mizbeach, on the altar. So the Rambam in the Ilchot Isurei Mizbeach in the Sefer Avodah, Halacha Vav, Halacha number 6 said, when 40 days passed from the time the wine emerged from the wine press, it may be offered on the altar as a libation, and that's again applied the time that they brought the offering in the Beit HaMikdash. Another important halacha we take from Adayot, and again the Rambam mentioned it in Berakhot Tmidim u'Musafim, the very first Perek Aleph, the first chapter. He said, Tamid shel shachar karev be'arba shaot. The daily offering, it was the morning offering, daily offering, that they sacrifice it, so there is a time restraint. There is until 4 hours. Although the daily morning offering was sacrificed before sunrise, the Rambam said we can extend in a certain circumstances. It may be sacrificed until the end of the 4 hours of the day, and it's applied to our time, since we hold the opinion of Yoshua ben Levi too, that the purpose of the prayer is the substitute for the offering. So it's a reflection of those offerings that they have a time restraint until the 4 hours. So the 4 hours come from that idea. Next, so we said here, ועל תמיד של שחר שקרב בין 4 שעות. You want to ask something? Okay. So, fine. ועל תמיד של שחר שקרב ב4 שעות. So we said, now the Torah said, when we talk about the manna from heaven, so they said that they collected it in Parshat Beshalach. We said that they וילקטו אותו בבוקר. They collected the manna early in the morning. איש כפי אוכלו, every person according to his need. וחם השמש ונמס. They said in chapter 16 in Exodus that when it's getting warmer, it's already in a sense melted. So what does that mean, cham hashemesh, when it's so warm? So they hold that that's applied to 4 hours, and you see how we reflect from the idea of manna from heaven to this point. So that now we said, man tana leha, who is the tana to hold it? Etnan v'cham hashemesh v'namas. That we said when it's a warm, it's already melted. Harei b'shesh shaot. That's applied to what time? It's 4 hours or 6 hours. Why? כשהוא אומר כחום היום, when they said that Abraham was sitting out of the tent and Hashem greeted him in Parshat Vayera, the Bereshit, the Genesis chapter 18. So that applied that Chom Hayom, that is sitting there when there's a hot day. So what is a hot day? That in that time Abraham was circumcised and it was great pain, and the third day he's sitting outside. So the Gemarah derived from that, Harei shesh shaot amur. So we know that it's already lunchtime, so it's 6 hours that it's hot. You go out at the 12 o'clock, it's very hot outside in the summertime. So Hama ani mekayem v'chama shemesh v'namas. What do we meant when it's a chama shemesh, when it's the warmth from the sun and it's melt? Be'arba shaot. So it's 4 hours. I want to comment on that in my book, Biurei HaKlomar Berashi al Shas, explaining the Klomar in Rashi and Shas. I have a long comment on this Rashi, because Rashi said, כשהוא אומר כחום היום, when he said that the heat day, הרי 6 שעות, אמרו 6 hours, mean, Rashi said the word klomar, which means something bothered him with the whole concept of when he used the word 6 hours, because Rashi doesn't understand clearly from that text that this applies for 6 hours. You just said kechom hayom. You put an assumption that it's 6 hours, but it's not clear. So Rashi said klomar, we learn matzinu b'makom acher, sheshina katuv l'shono. We find another location Rashi said that the text changes language, ve'amar V'hu yoshev petach ha'ol kechom yom, that Abraham sat outside of his tent when it's a heat day. V'lo amar kechom hashemesh, he used the word the heat of the day, not the heat of the sun. Ela hayom, the day. Mashma, you learn from that, shekol ha'mekomot chamim ben chama ben tzel u'medaber b'shara shishit. Every place that is warm apply to 6 hours, but still, I highly recommend it to read in my book the full explanation of the meaning. We're just running out of time, so we don't dwell on that. So the Gemarah said be'arba shaot. Rashi explained the ilu kodem arba shaot af hashemesh tzoned, because if you tell me before 4 hours that even the sun it's still cold. So he said money. So who hold in that opinion? Because it cannot be neither Rabbi Yehuda nor Chachamim. Lo Rabbi Yehuda velo Rabbanan. I Rabbi Yehuda ad arba shaot nametzaf rahu. If you go by the Rabbi Yehuda, until 4 hours is still considering morning. because he hold that you're still bringing the offering in the morning in the Arba Shot. Ad Arba Shot, Ira Banan Ad Chatzot Namet Tzafro. If you go by the Rabbanan, it's also morning. Why? Because at that time that is still bringing the morning offering, so it means that the collecting, it was in the morning, Lekita Tzma, Baboker, the collecting of all the manna was still in the morning. So if you go by the sages, so until Chatzot, it's still morning, because the morning offering, it still belongs to the morning, and it's bringing until the Chatzot, until the midday. So it means that we have a new idea now, fully new idea. So he said, so he responded, he said that this Braita can be either Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbanan. I Rabbi Yehuda 4 שעות נמת ספרו, I Rabbanan חצות נמת ספרו. Ibai Tema, another option, Rabbi Yehuda Ibai Tema Rabbanan, Ibai Tema Rabbanan, נאמר קרא בבוקר חלקהו לשני בקרים. So if you go by the idea of written twice the word בבוקר, in the morning, it's going to tell us that the collecting of the manna, it's in the morning, which means that it's early in the morning, and you divided the morning according to sages to two separate time. It's like first half of the morning until the beginning of the 4th hours, and then it's another second part after that. Viba itema, or another option, you go Rabbi Yehuda, Hai boker yetera lakdim lo sha'ah achat, which means this morning it's an addition that what's written baboker, which means that you proceeded with 1 hour. וכולי עלמא מיה וכמה שמש ונמס ב4 שעות, מהי משמע? That meaning, according to everyone, וכמה שמש ונמס, one is hot day, it's melt, so it means that it's 4 hours. רבי אחא אמר, מהי משמע? What's the meaning? So he said, רבי אחא בר יעקב אמר קרא וכמה שמש ונמס. He said that you learn it exactly, precisely from the text that they said that when it's the heat of the day, it's melt. Ezo hi sha'ah sha'shemesh cham v'atzel tzonen. When it's a time that it's that the sun it's hot and it's still shade, it's cold. Ve'omer b4 שעות, which means it's not at the all heat, it's partially. So several point here in Halacha, want to mention first from the Shulchan Aruch. When we're dealing with proper time, I just want to give the abbreviation to make it simple. Basically, there is a lechatchila time, there is b'diavad. So for sure we have to go by the earliest time, that's a lechatchila. But here you see that it's even in b'diavad. You can go with that. Okay, you know what? Let's go further and then we'll go to the specific halachot. Tfilat mincha ad ha'erev. We learn in the Mishnah the rabbis hold that the afternoon prayer may be recited until the evening. Amar le Rav Chizda le Rav Yitzchak. Rav Chizda said to Rabbi Yitzchak, Hata amar Rav Kahana lacha ki Rabbi Yehuda ulutnan bivchirat akvatei. There, with regard to in the morning prayer, Rav Kahana said the halacha is according to with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, since we learn in the Mishnah in the preferred tractate Adayot in accordance with his opinion. Here, Hachamai, here what's the ruling? Ishtek velo amar le velo midi. He was acquiesced. He didn't respond. He kept quiet, silent, and is nothing to him. So he's familiar with no established ruling in his master. So he wasn't sure. Amar Rav Chizda nechezean. Rav Chizda said, let's us look and see how to resolve the problem. How? Miderav metzalel shel Shabbat berev Shabbat mibod yom shmamina lacha k'Rabbi Yehuda. We learn from the fact that Rav prayed the Shabbat prayer on the eve of the Shabbat, while it was still day. So we learn from this that the halacha is according with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, that in the time of the afternoon prayer ends in the midpoint of the afternoon, after which time one may recite the evening prayer. So the Gemarah immediately rejected this proof based on the Rav practice. Why? Aderabba midravuna v'drabanan lo Rav emetzalu ad ota shma mina elacha k'Rabbi Yehuda. On the contrary, from the fact that Rav Huna and the sages, a student of Rav, will not pray until the evening, we learn from that that the halacha is not according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemarah said, "Hasha deloit maril cheta lo kemar velo kemar de'avar kemar avad ke'de'avar kemar nevad." Since we don't have the final halacha either way, so whoever acted according to one opinion of sages acted legitimately, and the vice versa, it's also fine. And so that's an important halacha. Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim Reish Lamed Gimel and 233, and also the Rambam in Hilchot Tefillah said it in chapter 3. So the Avad Kemar, because it's unsolved in the Gemarah, the dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and rabbis regard to the time beyond what one may not recite in the afternoon prayer until the evening or until the midpoint of Mincha was not resolved. So consequently, the Gemarah concluded that each individual has a license to conduct himself as he pleases. In that sense, whichever opinion he chooses, he fulfills the obligation. However, once he chooses, he is required to continue conducting himself in accordance with his choice. Therefore, if you recite afternoon prayer after the midpoint of Mincha, he may not recite the evening prayer until the evening. And the same if he plans to recite the evening prayer after the midpoint of Mincha before sunset, he must recite the afternoon prayer before the midpoint of Mincha. The generally accepted custom is that the afternoon prayer may be recited until the sunset. As another example, we can find that it's the mentioned in Shulchan Aruch Harav Baal HaTanya. He mentioned if a situation like Nesfirat HaOmer, so we have the idea of halacha to not to shave, but the question is if someone, there are some of the minhag to start from the Chol HaMoed, Passover, some started from Rosh Chodesh, right? So then some finish, those who start from the beginning finish in Lag BaOmer. There are those who do it day after Lag BaOmer, but there are those who start in Rosh Chodesh, and so they need to finish further on until Shavuot. Why? The Baal HaTanya explained it in Shulchan Aruch Harav. He said you cannot eat the cake and leave it full, which means you cannot go by leniency in both ways. You pick and choose your way, and you have to stick with that. Another important halacha, it's the idea of one may recite Shabbat prayer on the eve of Shabbat before the nightfall. So the Rambam explained it in the Hilchot Tefillah. It says, "Mitpalel Adam shel Shabbat be'erev Shabbat." A person is permitted to pray the Shabbat evening prayer before the nightfall and assume all the customs of Shabbat, which means that it's applied to Kiddush, a Shabbat meal at the time. So it's based on the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda with regard to the to afternoon prayer, that one may always recite the evening prayer before the nightfall, even if one does not always conduct himself in according to that opinion. Here is a difference, because in Shabbat it says we're lenient and allow him to do so on Shabbat Eve. So those who have a little children and they pray, they daven Mincha on Shabbat and Kabbalat Shabbat earlier, they must be reminded that they have to repeat the Shema in a proper time, but they can do that earlier. Rav Ikla Levei Gneva V'Tzaleh Shel Shabbat Be'erev Shabbat. Rav happened to the house of sages, sage Gneva was named, and he prayed the Shabbat prayer the eve of the Shabbat before the nightfall. So this is an example that Rabbi Yirmiyah Barabba was praying behind Rav. So when Rav finishes prayer, וסיים רב ולא פסק לצוטי דרבי ירמיה, but not take 3 steps back to interrupt the prayer of Rabbi Yirmiyah. As you know that you're going backward 3 steps when you finish the Amidah. So he said, Shema Mina Tlat, you learn 3 things from this incident, 3 halachot. 1, Shema Mina mitpalel adam shel Shabbat be'erev Shabbat. The person can pray Shabbat prayer the eve of Shabbat, as we just mentioned, in Shabbat before the nightfall. Number 2, Shema Mina mitpalel talmid achorei rabo. The student should pray behind his rabbi, teacher. ושמע מינה מתפלל תלמיד, שמע מינה אסור לעבור לפני המתפללים. The third one is that it prohibited to pass before those who are praying. So meaning if someone stands and say Amidah, is like he's communicating with the king, he's saying Shmoneh, so he's saying Amidah. So it's prohibited to pass before those who are praying. The Shulchan Aruch said in Orach Chaim, Kuf Bet 102, he said, one may not pass with Arba Amot, with 4 cubits, 2 meters before another who is praying, which means a person is praying to Hashem and he's saying Amidah, you cannot pass in Arba Amot with him. However, one may pass adjusting to 1 or 2 when praying if he is alongside and not before him. If you look at the Zohar in Chayei Sarah, it's he makes no distinction and prohibits passing within the 4 cubits at all sides when they're praying. The Zohar go in the Kabbalistic aspect that one, basically in our simple language, if one praying to Hashem and is communicate directly with him, you cannot pass by in between, especially in the time of the Amidah. Mesayah le Rabbi Shua ben Levi. The Gemarah respond and said that we supported this idea of Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi, asur la'avod keneged hamipalelim. Person should not pass before those who davening. Eini veha Rabbi Ami veRabbi Asi chalfei. We see that the 2 great rabbis did it. Rabbi Ami veRabbi Asi chutz le'arba amot chalfei. They said that they are behind the 4 cubits. So again, halacha. We said that in Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, the Ramah said, "Al yitpel adam achorei rabo." A student may not pray directly behind his Rebbe, before him or alongside with him, with 2 meters, with 4 cubits, Arba Amot. Behind the Arba Amot, the 4 cubits, it's considering a separate domain and therefore is permitted. But again, the Ramah said and others that they apply only when they are praying as individuals, but if they're praying as a tzibur, as a congregation, if that is a regular sitting arrangement, it's not a problem. Even though it's permissible to avoid doing so, the custom is to allow. That's also Rambam said it in Talmud Torah. So we ask how Rabbi Yirmiyah acts in that way and pray behind Rav. We just say that a person should not pray at the front of his Rebbe or behind. So you see here the Tosefta add to that few points, but the idea is that it's like he talking to God, and now the person is bowed. It looks like he bowed to him. ותניא רבי אליעזר אומר, המתפלל אחורי רבו ונותן שלום לרבו ומחזיר שלום לרבו והחולק על שבתו של רבו ואומר דבר שלא שמע מרבו גרם לשכר שפלג מישראל. Very strong opinion that he said that why the divine province withdraw from Israel if someone does one of these things. One pray behind his Rebbe, one is greet his Rebbe without waiting for his rabbi to greet him first, one who returns his Rebbe greeting without saying greeting to you Rebbe, or one who rivals his Rebbe's yeshiva, which means he established a yeshiva of his own and teaching during his Rebbe's lifetime without the consent. That's the Rambam's opinion. Or one who says something in the name of his Rebbe which is not here directly from his Rebbe. So it's all of a idea of people who does very disrespectful, like quoting something that is not corrected or not him, or doing opening something without his consent, etc. So all of that created a divine presence to withdraw. Shani Rabbi Baraba the Talmid Chaver Abba. Talmid Chaver, it's in our definition, it's called disciple colleague, which means disciple colleague. The Rambam explained in Sefer Amidah and Talmud Torah that the disciple colleagues, Talmid Chaver, may pray behind his rabbi, or however, even disciple colleague may not pray before him. There's a certain decorum. In a small example, I remember, just mentioned my late father-in-law, the Rabbi Rashi of Shomron, Rabbi Tan. So many times he tried to tell me that we are like in a relationship of Talmid Chaver, that I'm not really full-time students, I'm in some ways like friend. And I try to treat my son-in-law too. I have a son-in-law that is a giant scholar in Yeshiva Keren B'Yavne, which is one of the yeshivot, and he is learning Dayanut. And the Rosh Yeshiva of Kav said that he is the walking computer of the yeshiva, which means that anytime they need a quote at the middle of the shiur, right away my son-in-law Reuven Deutsch know it by heart. So it's a matter of fact that when he was here in America, and we have an urgent question in Avelut in the law of mourning during the second Yontiv of Pesach, he right away gave the quote without even looking at the whole different sources in Shulchan Aruch. So I'm treating him the same as in a way, my father-in-law treated me, that I call him Talmid Chaver, that is not just son-in-law, but is like a disciple colleague, because of his, even we are distant in age, but he's a great, tremendous scholar. והיינו דקאמר לרבי ירמיה בר אבא, מי בדלת? And that's what Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba asked, did you distance yourself from labor except the sanctity of Shabbat? אמר לי, אם בדל נא, ולא אמר מי בדל מה. Rabbi said to him, yes, I distanced myself, and Rabbi Yirmiyah did not say to him, did the master distance himself, as would have been appropriate had merely been a Rav student. So again, it's a good example of that. Umi badel, although Rav replied and distanced himself from labor, did he indeed need to distance himself from labor? Didn't Rav Avin said, ואמר רב אבין פעם אחת פעל רבי של שבת בערב שבת. So he said that one time Rav Yehuda Nasi prayed the Shabbat prayer at the eve of Shabbat before the nightfall. ונכנס למרחץ, he entered the bathhouse, ויצא, and he walked out, and emerged, ושנה לנו פרקים ועדיין לא חשכה, and he taught us 1 hour chapters, and that we learn, and it was not yet dark. אמר רבא, ההוא דנכנס להזיע וקודם לזרע אבא. In that case, he entered to a bathhouse to perspire. It was like a sauna in those days, and it was before the sages issues the decree that prohibiting entering to that room like sauna, the wet sauna, in the bathhouse on Shabbat. So the Gemara asks, "Ini, is that so?" Va'abai eshra leRav Dimi bar Levi lechavru Yisale. The Abai permit Rav Dimi bar Levi to bring the basket with the sulfur, even though he had already recited the Shabbat prayer, including all the other prayers. So that's basically indication that is permitted to perform labor even after the Shabbat prayer. So the Gemara said, "Auta Abai, that was a mistake, that was an error." Several halachot. So the Shulchan Aruch in Yoreh Deah, in the Reish Mem Bet in 242 said, "V'acholek al yeshivato shel rabo," one who rivals his rabbi's yeshiva, which means entering a dispute with one's rabbi, is tantamount to entering into a dispute with the divine presence. So what is the definition of one entering into a dispute with his rabbi? If one was established in his rabbi's lifetime, a rival study hall where he teaches without the permission of his rabbi. So in other words, like we read the other day about a situation that with Shmuel and Levi, if you remember. But again, someone established some study at the same place while he didn't get the permission from his rabbi, so it's basically create unnecessary tension. Or ואומר דבר שלא שמע מפי רבו. So again, the Shulchan Aruch Yoreh Deah said the Shach, we should read the comment of the Shach on this, but he said that if someone said something that did not hear directly from his teacher, so the whole idea is that when you have a student that hears something, he should be careful not to make an attribute statement that did not hear from his rabbi, as others are liable to mistakenly assume that he heard it from his rabbi. When I'm making a statement from another source, he must clearly attribute to the source. That's very important. You see it in the political world that they always say something and quoting and misquoting and put it out of context. So that's a very dangerous situation. So in the conclusion, we said here that accepting the Shabbat by mistake That's a very important Magen Avraham. He said in the Orach Chaim 263, he said that an individual who inadvertently began Shabbat before its designated time, he lit the candles and recite the Shabbat evening prayer before they realize that it's a mistake, he may perform labor that is prohibited on Shabbat until the Shabbat begins. At that time, he must repeat the evening prayer. However, a community that is inadvertently began Shabbat before its designated time and prayer in the midpoint of Mincha need not to pray again. With regard to performance of labor, prohibition on Shabbat, some permitted as the acceptance of Shabbat as inadvertent, which means you make a mental statement that I'm not accepting Shabbat upon myself and I allow to do certain things. I'm just participating with the services, for example, if you have young children, or for example, to complete the minyan. Others, poskim, distinguished between those members of the community who is lit Shabbat candles, from whom labor is prohibited, and those who did not light candles, from whom is permitted. So again, we have to know what is the Shabbat in a ta'ut, in a mistake. V'ta'uta mi hadra. So now I ask a question. If you tell me that the Gemarah go back and it said, can a mistake be reversed? Veha amar Avidan. Avidan is the name of one of the students of Rabbi Yehuda Anasi. He said, פעם אחת נתקשרו שמיים באבים. One time it was overcast, the sky became overcast, so leading the people to think that it was dark of night, but it wasn't. It's like those tornadoes or hurricane, God forbid. So the people in Tampa in Florida are feeling that, oh, it's already dark. So people think that it's already dark at night. נכנסו לבית הכנסת, they entered the shul, והתפללו של מוצאי שבת בשבת. They recite the evening prayer of the conclusion of Shabbat, and it was still Shabbat. ונתפזרו האבים וזרחה החמה, and all of a sudden, later the cloud cleared, and the sun shone before the watch time, right? Indicating that it's still day. ובאו ושאלו את רבי, so they came into Rabbi Yehuda Anasi and they asked what should do. Should we have prayer? Should we not have prayer? Ve'amar, and he responded to them and he said, look, since you make those prayer, you don't need to pray again. Itpalelu, itpalelu. You did it. That's, even that was a mistake, it's not reversible, and you should continue. So the Gemarah said, respond, Shan etzibur lo madrichin lo. There is a very important concept, it's called tircha etzibur, not imposing on the public. You don't ask them, put the burden to pray again. It's already done. אמר רבי חייא ברבים, רב צלה של שבת בערב שבת, רבי יהושע מצלה של מוצאי שבת בשבת. Which means here the Gemarah continued to discuss different possibilities. One of them is reciting the evening prayer earlier, even on Shabbat. So Rabbi Chiya bar Ravin said, Rav prayer, the Shabbat prayer, the eve of Shabbat before the nightfall. And Rabbi Yoshia will pray the evening prayer of the conclusion of Shabbat on Shabbat. Said an example, Rav tzaleh shel Shabbat בערב Shabbat אומר קדושה לכוס, או אומר קדושה לכוס. So he said, with regard to the fact that Rav prayer Shabbat prayer on the eve of Shabbat before the nightfall, so the big predicament here is a question, who recite the Kiddush over the cup of wine or not. So he said, Tashma, come and hear. Dama Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, the Rav Nachman said in the name of Shmuel, מתפלל אדם של שבת בערב שבת. One night pray the Shabbat prayer at the eve of Shabbat before the nightfall, ואומר קדושה על הכוס. And he recite the Kiddush over the cup of wine. והילכת עקבתי, and halacha is according to this ruling. So let me mention an halacha. Kiddush while it's still in day. So Shulchan Aruch said in Hilchot, in Orach Chaim in 267, he said Kiddush mi ba'od yom. Imagine if a person have a family with little children, and they cannot sit, especially in the summertime, for very late evening dinner or Friday night, or if a person needs to catch to be the 10 men or the early minyan, so you can do kiddush when it's still day. So one who began Shabbat before its designated time, so he may recite kiddush and eat the Shabbat meal before dark. So what we said, a statement of Rav Nachman that said that Shmuel said, in accordance with the Gemarah rule, some poskim say that he must extend the meal until after dark and make certain to eat at least kezait, which is like an olive bark, past dark, so that it will be considered a meal eaten on Shabbat. Because the Torah said in Shemot, in Exodus 16, eat that today, for today is Shabbat to the Hashem. So again, lechatchila, one should adapt the Mishnah Berurah said the stringency, the chumrah. But if not, then it can go in that sense, but at least kezait which will be eaten Shabbat. And again, I remind you to do Shema again when it's a proper time. Now, Rabbi Yoshua Metzalel shel Motzei Shabbat v'Shabbat. A similar dilemma was raised concerning the fact that Rabbi Yoshaya will pray the evening prayer of the conclusion of Shabbat on Shabbat, which means after praying while it's still Shabbat, Omer Avdalah ala kos, Omer Avdalah ala kos. While it's still Shabbat, does he recite Avdalah over a cup of wine or does not recite Avdalah over a cup of wine? Tashmad Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Come and hear the resolution to this, what Rav Yehuda said in Shmuel. מתפלל אדם של מוצאי שבת בשבת ואומר הבדלה על הכוס. One pray the evening prayer at the conclusion of Shabbat, and on the Shabbat recite Avdallah over the cup of wine. So halacha, it's important to know the Rambam. He said in Hilchot Tefillah chapter 3, and he said מתפלל אדם של מוצאי שבת בשבת ואומר הבדלה על הכוס. One may pray in the evening prayer on the conclusion of Shabbat, and Shabbat recite the Avdalah over the cup of wine. This is only done in the very rare circumstances, or even if it's necessary to facilitate the performance of a mitzvah. Then one is permitted to recite the evening prayer of the conclusion of Shabbat on Shabbat and to recite the Avdalah over the cup of wine. However, one does not recite the blessing over the candle and perform the prohibited labor until the nightfall. So in other words, in a regular circumstance, there is no need to end Shabbat hastily, especially because many hold, in accordance with the ruling of the Tur, that one may not recite the evening prayer, the Arvit, until the dark. Omar Rab Zeira, Omar Rabbi Asi, Omar Rabbi Lazar, Omar Rabbi Chanina, Omar Rav. That's the name between all these great sages. Betzad Amud Zeh, התפלל רבי ישמעאל ברבי יוסי של שבת בערב שבת. They said alongside of this specific pillar, before me, Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi, prayed the Shabbat prayer, the eve of Shabbat before the nightfall. So it's like a proof. כי עתה הוא לאמר, בצד תמרה הווה ולא בצד עמוד הווה. That is so that beside a palm tree, not beside a pillar. ולא הרבי ישמעאל ברבי יוסי הווה, אלא רבי אלעזר ברבי יוסי, it's a different name of rabbi, ולא של שבת בערב שבת, אבל מוצאי שבת בשבת הווה. It wasn't evening that pray earlier, but it was the concluding of Shabbat earlier. תפילת הערב אין לה קבע. We learn now the evening prayer is all night, is no fixed time, no specific hour. מה אין לה קבע? What do you mean is no specific hour? אילי מדעיב באי מצלי כוללליה ליתנה תפילת הערב כל הלילה. So if you tell me that you can do it evening all the time, so it's no specific time, you can do it all night. אלא מאי אין לה קבע. So what does that mean is no fixed? כמאן דאמר תפילת ערבית רשות. There is an opinion that hold that evening prayer is optional. דאמר רב יהודה אמר שמואל תפילת ערבית, רבן גמליאל אומר חובה, רבי יהושע אומר רשות. There is a מחלוקת if it's a obligatory or it's optional. אמר רבי הלכה כדברי אומר חובה. Abai hold that it's הלכה according to one who said it's obligatory, ורבא אמר הלכה כדברי אומר רשות. Rabbi said halacha is in accordance with the statement that one is said that the evening prayer is optional. Tanu Rabbanan, the Rabbi said, Ma'aser Talmid Chacham sheba lifnei Rabbi Yoshua. One student became before Rabbi Yoshua, who said that it's optional. Amar lo tfilat arbit reshut or chovad. Evening prayer is optional or obligatory. Amar li reshut, he said it's optional. Ba lifnei Rabban Gamliel. He went to a second opinion. He went to Rabban Gamliel, אמר לו תפילת ערבית רשות או חובה? אמר לו חובה, רבן גמליאל said no, it's obligatory. אמר לו ורב יהושע אמר לי רשות. I went early to Rabbi Yeshua and he said the optional. אמר לו, המתנת שיכנסו בעלי תריסים לבית המקדש. He said wait until the master of the shields, which means that Torah scholar who battled the war of Torah enter the study world. Okay, discuss. כשנכנסו בעלי תריסים, when those great rabbis enter, עמד השואל ושאל, that person stood up and he asked, תפילת ערבית רשות או חובה? Evening prayer is optional or obligatory? אמר להם רבן גמליאל חובה. רבן גמליאל said obligatory. אמר להם רבן גמליאל לחכמים, כלום יש אדם שחולק בדבר הזה? Does anybody disagree with me? אמר לרבי יהושע לאו. רבי יהושע said no. אמר לו, ולא משמך אמרו לי רשות. רבי גמליאל said to רבי יהושע, but I heard from your name that they told me that the evening prayer is optional. אמר ליהושע, עמוד על רגליך ויעידו בך. רבן גמליאל said to רבי יהושע, יהושע, stand on your feet and they will testify against you. עמד רבי יהושע רגליו ואמר, אלמלא אני חי והוא מת, יכול החי להכחיש את המת, ועכשיו שאני חי והוא חי, היה יכול החי להכחיש את המת. It's like try to say that it's a strong opposition. It said if I was alive and the students was dead, the living can contradict the dead, but I could deny issues that ruling. Now I'm alive and he's alive, how can the living contradict the living? I have no choice but to admit that I said it. היה רבן גמליאל דורש יושב כולו, רבן גמליאל did something very strong on him. He was stand all day, רבי יהושע עומד רגליו, he let רבי יהושע stand all day, like very severe punishment. רבן גמליאל הנשיאת שרמנו כלם ואמרו לחוצפית ומדרגמת, עמוד ועמד. Until all the people assembled began murmuring and said to Chutzpit, the one who is a disseminator, stop conveying Rabban Gamliel's lecture, and he stopped, which means that Amri al Kamen Tzar Ibn Ezel, the Gemarah said how long we afflicted him pain, which means that caused Rabbi Yeshua pain that is say optional. בראש השנה השתקע צערי. Last year in Rosh Hashanah, it was the issue. Last year with the halachic issue, we caused him sorrow. It's a famous story about Rabbi Gamliel ordered Rabbi Yeshua to come and carry his stuff and bag the day that he hold that it's the proper Yom Kippur. So it's a great, caused him great sorrow.